Welcome. I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about building the resilient leader in you. In our show today, learn how to resiliently turn business disruptions into opportunities through reinvention with industry leader Nadya Zhexembayeva. Our final segment, Grounds for Thought, will feature a surprising reinvention, so stay tuned for what's brewing. Welcome back. You're watching Unlocked, and I'm your host, Madeline Blair. In today's fast-paced world, the challenges faced by companies and professionals seem to multiply every year. It often feels like the moment you take a step forward, something disrupts your progress. But what if you could not only navigate these disruptions, but turn them into your greatest advantage? My guest today is Dr. Nadya Zhexembayeva. I'm going to say it one more time. Zhexembayeva. Often hailed as the reinvention guru and the queen of reinvention. She is a distinguished scientist, entrepreneur, and author with a focus on resilience and reinvention. Nadya has guided eminent organizations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Coca-Cola, Cisco, L'Oreal Group, Danone, Henkel, Erste Bank, Danfoss, and Knauf Insulation in transforming their products, leadership strategies, and business models to adapt to evolving market demands and impending disruptions. As a dynamic speaker, Nadya has inspired over 500,000 executives through her keynotes and workshops and has delivered 4 powerful TEDx talks. She is also a prolific author with several award-winning books to her name and a respected contributor to prestigious publications like Forbes and Harvard Business Review. Nadya, welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you so much for having me, Madeline.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Well, Nadya, I have to begin with describing, I suspect, one of the reasons why you do this work, because the world is constantly changing. I'd like us to just sort of begin with talking a little bit about the kind of changes that businesses and people who are pursuing their careers get hit with. So why is it that we should be concerned with reinvention?
Well, I have to give you some scientific data, but also come back to my personal story. So
Sure.
my own interest in this started with the collapse of my country, Soviet Union. And while I was incredibly honored and happy that we were reinventing, the method by which it collapsed and the impact on everyday life of people, the rise of crime, the incredible rise of suicide rate, the inflations and hundreds of percent, the lost lives, the just the pain of the 90s got me to research why this happens and is there a better way to evolve. So what I discovered is that most of management tools, and surprise, surprise, these are relatively fresh tools. Most of what we use in management has been invented after the Second World War, so it's not even 100 years old. Even the ones that we've used in accounting for about 500 years, it's still relatively short blip in the humanity history. Most of these tools were working under the assumption of very stable conditions, and most of authors that develop classics in strategy or operations or HR or any other daily assumptions you make in business, those were all authors operating under the assumption that the world will be relatively low volatility and high stability. And this tool stopped working this century. It's very obvious we all suffocated and suffered. So any disruption you measure, and you can look at Accenture Global Disruption Index, which is, I think, this year is renamed as a Pulse of Change Index. You can look at other data. IMF has the Uncertainty Index. All of them show massive, massive jumps in disruption. So, if you were to guess in the last 5 years, what would be your guess 5 years ago versus this year? What is the average growth in the amount of disruption businesses experience per week, per month? How much more disrupted is your week?
I have to say, I want to say at least 10 times.
Mhm.
I'll leave it at that.
Uh-huh. So this is a beautiful quiz for all of us. And Accenture measures disruption using different categories. So it's anything from technological and social disruption to economic volatility, geopolitical things like the wars we are experiencing that, of course, disrupt the supply chains routes. For example, if you used to fly from Asia to Frankfurt, you know, like I do, that the average flight now is at least 3, 4 hours longer because you're flying around massive wars, which is much more expensive, huge fuel waste, and much longer. And the same with your goods that are now shipped from
Yeah.
various parts of the world. So the actual number is 200% growth.
Wow.
200% growth. And it's 5 years prior to that, it was a relatively small growth. I think it was around under 20% for sure. So we are looking at the last 5 years of explosion of change. And it's, of course, fueled by technology, but also by climate change and few other things that are reshaping the boundaries and the rules of the game. And if you are still using old tools and old assumptions, you will feel completely overwhelmed and burnt out.
It's funny because I'm suddenly sitting here saying to myself, okay, Madeline, you have to stop complaining about learning new systems because I feel like I have to learn a new system every week. I'll stop
Absolutely.
complaining.
That's the case for all of us. So then it's a question of what are you going to learn? What are
Mhm.
you going to outsource? How are you going to distribute
Yeah.
your learning between different members of your team or your community?
Yeah.
As we are all facing a lot, but half of it is really in our mind. So, researchers in medicine and biology have discovered that if you believe stress is bad for you, you will have more damage to your body than if you think that stress is neutral or even positive. So it's the stress itself is not as harmful as what you think stress does to you. And therefore, if we don't stress over the fact that we need to learn new things, but actually look at the positive, which is all the great stimulus to your brain and all the things you're supposed to do to keep Alzheimer's away, learn new tool, learn new system, learn new upgrade, keep your mind fresh. It's a positive thing, but it has to start with our mindset and the paradigm in which we're in.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you do a lot of work in reinvention.
Yes.
Is there a difference between that and innovation?
Hmm. That's a question that is asked most of the time. And we've been working in this field for the last 10 years. So I want to say three big things that are important to address when answering this question. Number one is innovation and reinvention are not at odds with each other. In the research we've done, we've seen 9 different types of reinvention being used as a portfolio, as a cocktail in a typical successful company. And some of them are in the category of innovation, while others would be in a continuous improvement or some other category. So, innovation is one of forms of reinvention, and they're not at all at war with each other. It just occasionally innovation alone is not enough. And generally speaking, the more diverse your portfolio, your reinvention portfolio, and well mixed and updated, the more likely you are to survive and thrive.
Uh, Classic financial strategy.
I see,
Yes,
absolutely, absolutely. So diversify, even when
diversity.
you're looking around your reinvention portfolio. So let's say when you think about your career, having multiple career tracks. So you have your main track, which is your corporate job, and you have a perhaps a side hustle. You teach in a local university, or you consult, you coach, or maybe you build an investment portfolio or bought a rental home, or you do something else to diversify. And some of your steps will be quite radical and would be truly innovative. And some would be just a minor improvement and wouldn't be in an innovation category, but all of them are important. So that's number one, the first difference in reinvention and innovation. The second difference is really the last 10 years is the move from what we call reinvention 1.0, reinvention 2.0, which is movement from change as a project to change as a continuous process. We lived in a world where it was okay to change once every 10, 15, 20 years. And that's why most companies outsourced that effort to wonderful consulting partners who would do this all over the world. Because why would you keep in house a competence that is only needed once every 5 to 10 years?
Yeah.
But today, reinvention is more like taking a shower. If I don't take a shower on a regular basis, I begin to stink. So if you don't wash off your products, your pricing strategy, if you don't wash off your suppliers, if you don't take a regular fresh look at your customer base, you begin to stink too. So reinvention is no longer an occasional project, it's a continuous process. And in that sense, innovation is important in some steps of that process. And we typically talk about three steps: anticipate, design, and implement change. So, innovation is very important in designing the new direction, but
Mhm.
it's not the only game in town, and the totality of it is important. And finally, the third distinction is innovation is crucial if and when it's linked to strategy and finance and foresight, when it's seamlessly integrated with change management, project management, Scrum, Agile, and other implementation techniques. On its own, it tends to become innovation for innovation's sake and gets annoyance among employees and investors alike. So, unless we bridge it with all other efforts, we generally speaking missing the boat.
As you were going through that list,
Hmm.
uh, it occurred to me back to when you said it's the mindset.
Hmm.
If you see stress as a problem, it's going to be more of a problem for you. If indeed change is continuous as a human entity, you'd
Hmm.
better see it. Well, no, I'm just going to say that. You better decide that there is going to be something positive that you can find in it. So otherwise, you would just die, I think, of being totally overwhelmed.
Yes, absolutely. And that relationship with change is acquired, it's not innate. If
Yes.
it was innate, any of you who ever had a baby, you would immediately know that the baby would never learn and develop if change
Yeah.
was perceived as something dangerous,
Yes.
fearful, or associated with loss. Babies are natural reinventors.
Yeah.
They change nonstop. They're
Mhm.
exceptionally comfortable with uncertainty. You don't see a baby demanding a detailed agenda for the day. Neither do you see a baby who needs a bonus to start walking. Change is natural. This is what we are wired for.
Yeah.
The issue is that for no bad reason, just cultural norms and historical context, from very early age, long before we are conscious of ourselves, we start getting messages that associate change with something negative. And I bet you have at least one proverb you heard from your grandparents that, in one way or another, was suggesting that you should go slow, that you shouldn't rock the boat, that you shouldn't fix things that are not broken. That, in my culture, there's a famous saying: measure 7 times, cut 1 time. Don't do change. Be super, super risk averse. That's the message we got nonstop. So we are educated out of our reinvention capacity, not that we never had it.
It's interesting you say that because as you said that, something came to mind that I haven't thought of in years. My grandfather
Mhm.
would always say, "You have to pace yourself, Madeline. You have to pace yourself." He was a man who could outperform all his sons, all his grandchildren.
Yeah,
So that was
absolutely.
my big message. You have to
So you
pace.
got it very early on.
Yeah.
Don't rush, don't move forward too fast. There's a danger. There's a danger in moving.
Hmm.
And that's a subliminal message we all
Yeah.
got in every single culture.
Yeah.
So it's not that we're bad at change, is that we had a period in historical context where stability was perceived as good and change was perceived as bad. There's little evidence that's the case, but that is the cultural norm. And that cultural norm is now sinking companies and destroying careers, because that's the complacency that I see in every single company I worked with that is struggling to stay afloat.
Mm. Actually, that invites the next question I wanted to ask you, which was so often we see that change initiatives, transformation, reinvention efforts fail.
Yes.
Now, clearly, it starts with our early programming, so to speak. But what are some other things that you see that get in the way?
Well, absolute majority of change initiatives do not succeed. And while many debate that data, it's been done by so many different organizations and efforts, including last month, Bain published their research of 300 massive transformation efforts, and the success rate where companies met their expectations for the transformation efforts were at 12%, same as it was for last whatever 5 or 10 years. You guys can Google its Harvard Business Review article on that topic. So we've been at very low change success rates, ranging somewhere between 10 and 20%, 10 and 30%, sometimes 25, a little bit higher, but it's still pretty low. So the reason we see now that are really interrupting or decreasing the likelihood of success are very different than the reasons we've seen 20 or 30 years ago. 20 or 30 years ago, if you remember, we had the first introduction to the formal change management. The field of change management really took root in the 90s and early 2000s.
Mhm.
And the idea was, you set a project, there will be beginning, middle, and the end. You need to create a burning platform because people don't see a need to change, and you need to organize it in this project manner and get done with it. And that worked very well for a while with the kind of clear cut stages and steps, until we got to the point where a typical employee, according to last year Gartner research, is currently experiencing 10 plant transformation per year, where only 5 years ago they were experiencing only two plant transformation per year. And on top of that, there are tons of unexpected, unplanned transformations that also happen every year. So you're bombarded with a request to move to a new IT system, to face a new HR or compensation system, to enter new markets, to exit markets, to introduce new products. And now, on top of everything, COVID and artificial intelligence of the last few years, to name just few trends. So the idea that we need a burning platform, we're long burned. We don't need to warm up to change. So it's not the principles have changed, but the practices have not. And we still see in academia and in multiple events and conferences and certificates the same idea of stage theories of change, where you do A and then you go to B and then you go to C. It's still a project based view of change rather than a process based. It's still occasional rather than continuous. So the fundamental approach has not yet changed. But there's also a psychological contract issue. And I published an article literally today, again, Harvard Business Review, on the psychological contract around change. And what I'm seeing routinely is that the employees are still unconsciously living in a psychological contract with their company that cannot be fulfilled, meaning the employee believes that if I support your change, dear boss, you leave me alone for a couple of years. And the boss, by every mean possible, simply cannot do that because the boss is bombarded with new competition, new technology, new regulation, new war, new climate disaster, new heat wave, new whatever thing that is happening this week. So the employee then feels betrayed and lied to, even though it's never verbalized. These are assumptions and hidden tacit value and culture norms that need to be addressed.
So, what does a manager do?
Manager starts investing into a new psychological contract. So I'll mention a few examples. One of my dear students in the field of reinvention, she's a chief people and business process officer at a telecommunication company, Beeline, Tahmina. She actually created multiple types of events that happen routinely throughout the year to have conversations around the speed of change and disruption and then do something about them. So, one of her events is softly translated into something like soft kill sessions, where they come and they kill projects, product solutions, things they started working on and they haven't finished because they're no longer relevant. So you just clean your desk, you kind of clean your to do list on a regular basis and accept the fact that many of the ideas of what you thought would be relevant just 6 months ago is not supported by the facts and the reality and the feedback of the market or internal testing and so on. So she creates this multiple events throughout the year where the idea that change is constant, that disruption is normal, that it actually makes our life easier, that we can take things off our plate instead of constantly adding things on our plate, and on and on. These positive messages around change and reinvention are constantly reinforced, not just in words, but in the company decisions and then implementation.
Oh, that's brilliant. Because what she has done is she has helped people learn that mistakes or changes like this are not a reflection of problems, but are
Ah,
reflections of reality. And it's okay.
I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Ah,
Absolutely.
well, what this reminds me of is the work that I do in resilience. So
Mhm.
let's expand on this. You often say that reinvention is a form of resilience. How
Mhm.
do you define organizational resilience?
Mhm. So for me, they go hand in hand, but they're slightly different in nature. For me, resilience is a dynamic, constantly updated, but it's a state. It's what state are you in or what kind of physical health you're in. So when you do the checkup, you can kind of see the different levels of resilience, the way you would see the different levels of resilience in my immune system. So you can say this is a very resilient company, this is a very resilient human being, and this human being picks up a virus like nobody's business and gets sick on a blow of the wind. So for me, resilience is a cumulative state of your past decisions and your overall level of health that should be, of course, developed and invested in continuously. Reinvention is what do you do with that health? So your body is healthy and you're able to bounce back when you're faced with a disruption, and what are you going to do about it? So reinvention is a more the activity. The resilience for me is the state out of which you're able to be more successful or less successful with that activity.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Should
See,
make
I can see it. For me, resilience is actually that moment when you decide you're going to move forward.
I love
That's where you have to prepare yourself for that moment, which is what you're talking about. Move. What are you going to do?
it.
Yeah.
And in terms of the movement, resilience allows you to bounce back and say, I'm going to go. Reinvention allows you to go faster, cheaper,
Ah,
more effectively
yes.
than ever before. Because at this point, reinvention is a very developed field. So, what do you need to do? Well, you need to anticipate change on a regular basis using tools of foresight, trend watching, and many others, data analytics, and so on. You need to design change using tools of innovation, design thinking, creativity, and so on. You need to implement change using tools of change management, project management, Scrum Agile, continuous improvement, organizational development, and so on. And then you start again. So resilience is your body cannot perform all these functions on a regular basis if you don't invest in resilience. And just being in a healthy state is not enough. You need to actually, I don't know, do something with that healthy body of yours. Otherwise, it will get old and tired as well.
Yes. Oh, okay. So I, I'm combining that with your manager who creates all these little places where they
Yeah.
can regularly review things, and I can see that really as a great exercise to to prepare what you call that resilient state.
Yes.
So and at the same time, I can see it relating to how I've defined it because they are identifying the paths, the possibilities after that, and then they pick one. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so for a company to be resilient, they have a lot of work to do.
Absolutely, but it's also a personal resilience. So
Yeah.
you've reinvented
Oh,
yourself many times and you built your own resilience every time you needed to make the
yes,
leap in
yes,
reinvention. How
yes.
did you do that at the personal level?
At the personal level,
Yeah.
ah, that's a great question.
I mean, I see. We've met many, many years ago,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I've seen you reinvent again and again, including this very show.
yeah,
So clearly, you have the capacity, you have the inner resilience, and you have the outer action
yeah,
that results in something new emerging.
mhm, yeah.
What allows you to stay resilient and reinventive?
It begins with knowing who I am and what I bring to the table and what I like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the clearer I become on that, the easier it is for me to choose the next step. Okay, I
Mm-hmm.
got to reinvent. But you know what? I really like doing that. So let me see how I can engineer something that I can do that with. I mean, I one of my reinventions was that I was going to do more speaking. Well, it turned out, yes, I did some more speaking, but what I discovered was this is what I love is interacting with people and interview. You know, it's I get to meet people all over the world. They're fascinating people. They're at the top of their game, and I said this is what I like. So you're right. Yes, I am, but I also do it beginning with who I am and what I bring to the table.
That
Yes.
is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
That is absolutely beautiful. So the same applies to companies. If you think about successful companies that are very good at staying afloat during disruption, the mistake is to think that it's all about change management, is understanding what do we change in our business model, in our product portfolio, in our team setup, and on, technological setup, digitization, and all of that. All of those are crucial issues, but they do not produce sustainable results unless you're also very clear about continuity management, meaning what will remain unchanged? What do we preserve? What do we never compromise on? What
Yes.
is our red thread that goes through every cycle of reinvention? And knowing that red thread and being very clear and kind of explicit and even visual with it in your organization is what allows you to bring the team on board because they don't feel like they're losing themselves or they're not losing the company they love so much. The red thread remains, and that allows them to commit and feel comfortable with change because they're proverbially thinking are not throwing the baby with the bathwater. They're not losing themselves. They're not losing years of their life. They're not losing something that they built with so much love. There
Hmm.
is a very clear idea that some things come and go, but there is a kind of core that will never
Hmm.
compromise.
It's one of the reasons I always advise managers to be as clear as possible in their own minds as to what their mandate is. And when I work with individuals, that thread, I love the word thread, that consistent thread is our values.
Mhm.
And the clearer we are about our values, then you can do something crazy and say it's okay because it's consistent with my values. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Beautiful, beautiful. Ah, all right. Do we have some specific things um, that that I mean, I have wonderful people who are on the show. I mean, the audience. I have a very loyal audience, by the way.
Me too. Hi, loyal audience.
And I always like to leave them with really something very practical. So let's talk about some specific steps. We've been talking really broadly. So what are some specific things they can do for themselves, their companies, their teams?
So, very simple things to start with is to start asking yourself, what do I need to change in my daily working schedule, my team's schedule, to allow for disruption to play its course and not play havoc with our time? So, number one, we know that disruption is increasing. We know it in our gut. Maybe we don't know that it's 200% increase, but we know it's significant. However, we continue to plan our weekly agenda as if things will not be disrupted. So, simple things, having blocks of time secured every week throughout the week for things that will fly in unexpectedly, your disruption slots or your unexpected tasks or something else. Because what happens now, we book ourselves to the maximum.
Yeah. Yep.
Disruption is up to 100%. So it's a guarantee you will get a client, email, a customer, a supplier, a boss, a team member will get stuck on a plane or a train, or climate change will float their house away, or whatever is the thing that is happening this week. And then you will be working evenings and weekends completely exhausted until the next week start, and you're already at a disadvantage. So things like living room in your calendar for unexpected,
Mhm.
room in your budget for the unexpected. One of my dear friends used to be a commissioner in the European Union. Commissioners are the 27 ministers of the entire union, which is 27 countries. And she was working with the entire European Union to start leaving room in the budget so that you can address unexpected things such as
It used to be called discretionary funds.
we need much more than the tiny
Yeah.
percentage of discretionary funds, because every year we would see a massive disruption that is, I don't know, 20% of the budget in the form of a COVID, in the form of Ukraine war, in the form of really fundamentals. And
Mhm.
then we are cutting that amount out of the existing programs that are already in progress. We're disrupting the plans of things that are working, destroying them, while simultaneously being too late to address the new emerging disruption. So, leaving time in your budget, leaving time in your calendar, having a routine places where you and your team say no to. So, in my life, Friday is my no hour where I look at my calendar and say, no, no, no. I was optimistic when I said yes to this. It's not, it's unrealistic because of the new disruption. So, it's a no, and having regular time to clean up your team agenda. In our case, we look at sprints. We use agile strategy format, and we do strategic planning in short sprints. For our company, it's 3 sprints a year, 4 months each. And each sprint, we set agenda for the next sprint, but we also say no to things that we didn't implement the previous sprint because things got disrupted, or we tried to implement and they didn't work, or we changed our mind, or we have new input from the market and we said that was a good idea 3 months ago, no longer a good idea right now. So having regular spaces and places, platforms or gatherings where you clean up, let go, celebrate with a lot of positivity, and you let go
Mhm.
of things that no longer serve you personally or professionally, that becomes just a basic hygiene. So these are things that are basic hygiene: the way you manage your time, the way you manage your money, and the way you manage your portfolio. Just to give you a statistic, PricewaterhouseCoopers, for the second year in a row, their CEO survey that surveys anywhere between 4 and 5,000 global CEOs named continuous reinvention the number one topic and the top priority of the CEO. And last year, CEOs reported that they're spending 47% of their time on reinvention and would like to up that to 57%. And the same report showed that typical company today is above 50% of all investment money goes towards reinvention, not preserving the current business. So we're looking at a time where this really deserves protected space, protected budget, and protected resources. That would be the starting point.
You know, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, the years of the admonition that you should strip things down to the very nub, just in time inventories. So you didn't have any margin. And suddenly there was no margin anywhere. And here you are saying, hey, you better put margin back in to your planning.
Absolutely. I mean, remember when we had empty car lots during COVID where there was shortage of chips? The whole car is
Yeah.
built, but without a tiny chip,
Yeah.
that car is waste and nobody can move anywhere. So just in time is a beautiful, very necessary concept if and when we have a relatively low volatility.
Yeah.
In a highly volatility environment, we need to supplement it with additional strategies. Not to say that it's a complete waste, no, absolutely not. But we need to be much more creative when we think about what if volatility stays high? What if the supply chain gets disrupted for 2, 3, 5 months?
Yeah.
Do we have the buffer to deal with that? And remembering that that is true for every capital, whether it's human capital,
That's right.
financial capital, physical assets, or anything else we need to perform.
It also suggests a very different mindset around, excuse me, around training and constant learning.
Hmm.
That has traditionally been squeezed out, uh, both time and resources. And yet, from what I hear you say, this is an area that expands, if you will, your margins for human capital, human capability, I should say, human competence. So this would be part of it as well.
It is. It's also a time to weave learning into everything rather than do it as a separate event. There are room for
Mhm.
standalone, separate experiences that are very, very important. And I still design and deliver such experiences for some corporations, but we always demand now, and we even say no to companies who are not ready to embed every form of learning, micro learning, more extended learning into the daily lives and book the time and budget in a typical project to do the learning and to make sure that the learning happens. I mean, Zoom got updated recently, and you need to learn the whole new toolkit. And
Right.
that's just how you run your meetings, let
Mhm.
alone something truly complex. So we have to recognize that the speed of change, technologically, socially, customer preferences, assumes that there needs to be time to get updated and become relevant on a regular basis. And without that time, you simply become not competitive anymore. So it's a basic cost of doing business. It's nothing innovative, it's nothing radical, it's just cost of doing business, just staying afloat. We're not talking about breakthroughs. We're talking about the fact that we live in the era that if you are standing still, you are actually moving backwards.
Right.
That unless you're constantly making steps to address the changes, you are not gonna stay afloat.
That's right. That's right. The I'm really hearing new things from you, Nadia, and I knew I would. Uh, and I love the fact that you've put margin back in. I'm very excited about that because I have argued that for years. You have to. I mean, why, if you take out all the margin, a manager has no levers. So why do you pay them anything? So if you're going to pay managers more, you give them some responsibility.
Mhm.
And then but they have to have a margin for that. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. Can you give us a story from one of your companies that you've worked with? Obviously, something you can share. I'd love to hear how you saw them absorb your lessons and implement.
Hmm. There's so many. Most companies we work with start with a one-time project, but built on a system, and every system is very different. In some companies, they implement a chief reinvention officer who then integrates strategy, innovation, and change under one umbrella and marry them to each other because historically, there's three camps. don't like each other, fight each other, speak different language. Change management associations and movements officially declared that they're about the people side of change. And unfortunately, that's perceived as disconnected from the financial side of change or technological side of change. So they're almost in different camps. And strategy, innovation, and change have to marry each other into a seamless process where each part passes the baton to each other to keep going in the marathon. So some companies going towards a full-on chief reinvention officer. We had a one of our students who is in Slovenia, and he was a CEO of his company, about 3 to 400 million dollar revenue year company. So it would be mid-sized company, and he took on the title of chief reinvention officer specifically because he wanted to deliver a message to the company that it will be a continuous effort. In some cases, you need to start with a bank. For example, we worked on Vancouver Island with a local credit union, Coastal Community Credit Union, and Coastal decided to do something super radical. They closed the whole credit union fully, with exception of technical support. Every single branch closed, came together into this massive space where we spent every invention day, and night before we also brought their customers. The entire island was able to join to change the mindset around continuous reinvention. And just because this happened to happen September 2019, the company believes that's exactly what allowed them to survive COVID half a year later, is that they were prepared for the idea that some unexpected disruption will come, and we have a chance to hit the ground running, and we know what we're going to do. We're going to, assess risks. We're going to start running multiple experiments. We're not going to get attached to any of those experiments. We don't need to be perfect anymore. Speed is more important than perfection. And you set up a system that allows you to do this again and again and again. So different organizations do it differently. Some do it by engaging the whole company, some do it by creating a new function, some do it by creating a separate legal entity like a venture capital fund that manages everything new and then ships it off to the main operations. It's very, very different per different company. The most important thing, you find something that fits your culture, your industry, your business model, and also you adapt the language. In some cases, it is a reinvention, but in some cases, it's something else that fits the language that is natural for your people rather than creating another artificial jargon that nobody understands.
How many times have we seen that?
And then everyone rolls their eyes at
Yes,
everything. Another, shiny object that is passing by, and another theory that will be relevant in how.
that's right. I remember so often when I would bring teams together and I would say to them, now, you don't tell them that this is the process we're doing. You just ask them about what they need and what their issues are.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Every time a graduate of one of our certified reinvention professionals program asks me, how do I sell reinvention? Like, you don't. You don't even mention. You don't do this. And now reinvention enters the stage and the magic will get your EBITDA 5 times over. No. You ask them what's the challenge and you use the tools to solve the challenge. And at some point, there will be a request to explain
Yeah,
more and give more background and depth. But at the beginning, meet the client, meet the system where it is, address the need on the ground, use the tools to go faster, cheaper, lighter, with more joy, and they will sell themselves. Please
yeah,
do not announce a big stage with, uh, you know, shining lights and
yes.
sound.
Well, but speaking of shining lights, I know that you have something to offer our audience. It's called a free book download. I
Yeah.
wonder if you could talk about that and how they can get in touch with you.
Of course. So during COVID, I had nothing to do because you cannot fly to see your clients.
Yeah.
So I asked almost 5,000 of our global reinvention community members to put together a handbook of chief reinvention officer, how to thrive in chaos. It actually has little COVID reminders right here that your business boat can get exploded at any time. So this is tools and cases and it's communally written and tested in different industries in very different countries. And please grab it on learntoreinvent.com or find me on my LinkedIn, and you will see the link straight on my profile, the Chief Reinvention Officer Handbook, How to Thrive in Chaos. You can download and test your own reinvention skills immediately as you get your download.
Fantastic. And I will post Learn to Reinvent. Is it learntoreinvent.com?
Yep.
I'll post that on the YouTube notes so that people can, they don't have to write it down if they're in their car listening or whatever. Yeah, they can always go there. Well, Nadya, I want to thank you so much. This has been such an exciting conversation. I knew it would be. And I don't think I'll ever forget the aspect that you said. Two things. One is that we need to bring the margins back. But the other is that brilliant manager who said, we're going to constantly look at what we have to stop doing. I just love it. Love it. So, Nadya, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and always wonderful to reconnect.
Thank you so much. Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. Oh, I got to take off. Take off. Nadya, I'm sorry, Nadya. I have to take you off. You know, if I were to say the term concrete block, what would you envision? Well, if you're like me, you might picture a gray, rough, rectangular shape, extremely functional, but not something you want to gaze at. In my house, the foundation is made of cinder block, but the builders cleverly concealed them with wood or brick, making that solid strength invisible. Enter Frank Lloyd Wright. His designs always seem to reflect his vision completely, with nothing hidden. When faced with the challenge of creating structural strength, concrete blocks were one of his options, and that's where this lesson begins. I've often mentioned the book that has profoundly influenced me. It's called 50 Lessons to Learn from Frank Lloyd Wright by Aaron Betsky and Gideon Fink Shapiro. Many of these lessons, although focused on architecture, translate seamlessly to management. Today's reflection is a lesson on number 38, Make Concrete Beautiful. Wright was driven not only by aesthetics, but also by function and construction on the given site. The site's location influenced the overall design, but he aimed to incorporate the site itself into the building, including the soil. To this end, he reinvented a way to create concrete on site using local soil designed for each blocks with a built-in design pattern, whether specific for that building. Wright was driven not only by aesthetics, but also by function and construction on the given location. The site's location influenced the overall design, but he aimed to incorporate the site itself into the building, including the soil. To this end, he reinvented a way to create a concrete on-site using local soil and designed each block with a built-in pattern specific for that building. When assembled, these blocks formed a beautiful geometric pattern, creating a rhythm that of a texture throughout the entire building. What struck me most was Wright's blend of beauty, functionality, and what was at hand. Each concrete block was designed to be assembled by craftsmen or even amateurs, using metal rods for reinforcement, rods that had specific slots and grooves in the block for insertion. That's reinvention. Now, I really can't talk about this without showing you some examples. So I'm borrowing directly from the book, giving full attribution to the authors and the photographer, Andrew Pillage. Here are some of the examples. Let me get this up. There it is. There it is. They illustrate his vision. The first two show the flowing pattern he created throughout a building's interior. The third highlights, get that up for you. The third highlights the genuine beauty he achieved using concrete, even in its simplest form. Frank Lloyd Wright was an artist who aimed to create beautiful buildings using the materials available to him. His innovative approach to concrete blocks, though initially costly and challenging, is inspiring modern architects to reinvent and improve upon his ideas with today's materials, allowing Wright's idea of using the simplest of materials to enhance the beauty of modern buildings. I like to think that Wright would have enjoyed listening to Nadya Zhexembayeva and her insights on reinvention. He was a master of reinvention, even when they didn't work as he intended, which is the last point about reinvention. Failure is just another reason to reinvent from a different place. And when you have reinvented, you know you can do it again. Just like being resilient builds your confidence that you can be resilient again and again. 50 Lessons to Learn from Frank Lloyd Wright by Aaron Betsky and Gideon Fink Shapiro. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. And if there's a question about your career or business that you'd like to explore, go to my website, MadelineBlair.com, schedule a free 30-minute conversation. And if you're on YouTube, click the like button and subscribe. If you do, others will find the information they are seeking more easily. Thanks for doing it. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilient leader.